The best response you can have to a payoff in a thriller is someone goes, "Oh, right, I forgot. Of course, I should have thought that."
On Story offers a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers, creators, and filmmakers. All of our content is recorded live at Austin Film Festival and our year-round events. To view previous episodes, visit onstory.tv. On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. From Austin Film Festival, this is On Story, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers, creators, and filmmakers. This week's On Story, the critically acclaimed creator of the WGN series Underground, Misha Green.
You know, for me, I love writing. Like when people say, you know, it's just so hard for me to get in front of that blank page. I'm like, I just don't experience that. I don't know that when I'm in front of the blank page, that's the only time I'm truly happy.
In this episode, Misha Green talks about her experiences as a first-time showrunner on her groundbreaking series.
I've been a slave all my life, waiting to die, to live, or for a miracle. But I'm done waiting.
20 years, I've been the master of this plantation, and I've not had one runaway.
Mama, you ever think about another life?
I've imagined thousands of different lives.
The plan is simple. We got to get a group of us together. We figure a way off of Master's land. We protect each other. Find strength in numbers, because look here, when we run, ain't no white man gonna be able to stop us.
You have this idea for a TV show.
Yes.
And how do you sort of pitch that, or how do you come up with that?
Underground, I had Joe Pokaski, who co-created it with me. We met on Heroes. We wrote scripts together on Heroes because sometimes they put writers who aren't writing partners together. And as opposed to being like changing every comma he made because it was really annoying, we gelled, we vibed. And I was like, you know what? I want to do a show about the Underground Railroad. Do you want to do a show about the Underground Railroad? And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And then we just started researching it. We started researching it, then we went and pitched it, and everybody was like, nah, it's not gonna be for us. And so then we wrote the pilot, because we were like, well, you don't get what we wanna do yet, so let's write the pilot. And we wrote the pilot, went back to people, and they were still like, nah. And my agent doesn't like me to tell this story, but I feel like he called in a favor. And was like, listen, this girl's gonna fire me unless you pick up this pilot. And then WGN came along and they picked it up. And I'm not gonna say that's who did it, but they picked it up. And that was the process.
Well, let's step back for a minute. You talked about sort of writing the spec, and I also heard that you wrote I think you said a 55 to 60 page Bible, right?
We decided to write the Bible to kind of be like, here's where the series goes over 5 seasons. Here's what all these characters are. Here's what an episode looks like, just to take away all the excuses in a way, because we had heard so many. And so it was about, that's why it started to balloon to 55 pages. I do not recommend you write a 55-page Bible for anything, but that's why, because we're like, let's take away all your excuses to say that this is not a TV series.
And so you talked about doing extensive research for this show. What kind of research are you doing for a show like Underground?
I love to read. I think that's also part of being a great writer, is reading a lot. So I read just everything. I just go through and literally go on Amazon and just be like, slavery, what is there to read? Read that. And then also watching. I think you watch everything, and surprisingly, everybody's like, I'm so sick of slave stories. And I'm like, there's not that many to watch. So I don't know how we're sick of them. But then I watch them and I go, oh, I know why we're sick of them. And then also the Library of Congress, I think one of the things that really kind of cracked open Underground is they have these enslaved narratives where they interviewed people speaking about their lives in slavery. And that, to me, I just went, whoa, because then you're hearing stories about how, like, this guy, you know, didn't have a pass to go to the plantation dance, which I didn't even know existed before I started researching. And he didn't have the pass, but he wanted to see the girls, so he went anyway and took the paddling and said the paddling was worth it. And to me, I'm like, what? Like, we don't hear, that's not the stories we hear about people actually living and loving and laughing. We just hear about the whippings or see the whippings. So that, I think, for me, again, and reading stuff, you know, the character of Rosalie, we read this letter this enslaved girl wrote about to run or not to run. And again, to me, I'm just like, wait, to run or not to run? Like, obviously that's a thing, but I've never seen that. That's problem put on screen and putting it into context like that. So I think for us on the show, research was so important.
And it's interesting that you say that because, you know, when you think about what you learn in school, it's usually, and I've heard you say this, it's like a paragraph or two about slavery, Harriet, Tubman, and the Underground Railroad, but we really don't know how that all worked. And I think Underground does a great job of sort of showing us that. So my question then becomes, so it's not your typical slave narrative, right? I mean, it's sort of a genre film, or I should say a genre story wrapped into a slave narrative. How did you approach that, and why did you decide to go that route?
I think that for me, everything kind of turns into a thriller. My obsession a little bit as a writer is what we're willing to do for metaphorical and physical survival. So I think the Underground Railroad for me, even in the love story of it, even in the heroics of it, I always kind of see that in every story I'm telling. So it just, and then naturally it fit into that when you read about, you know, the different ways people were escaping, the ingenuity they were using, the people going after them. It all kind of fit that thriller roller coaster very easily.
And it's interesting because I remember when I first watched Underground, I said, this is one of the sexiest slave narratives I've ever seen. I mean, really. And then to know that you wrote on Spartacus, I said, okay, I can kind of see that. And I guess the question with that is, was it your intention always to sort of try to rewrite the narrative of what we've known of slavery, or to sort of expose us to a different part of slavery that we probably haven't been exposed to?
You know, it's hard to say what your intention is, for me, at least when I'm doing it. When I'm doing it, I'm just trying to entertain myself, and I happen to like sexy and violent things and complicated, where everybody's right in the room when something's happening. But in hindsight, yes. You know what I mean? Because now I can see that I was like, in response to watching and doing research and watching all these movies in which it's portrayed in one sepia tone light, all of that infused in, and this idea of giving a voice to the voiceless. And seeing it again, I looked at the story and I go, this is obviously such a cool story. How have we not had millions of movies about this? And so I don't think I intended at the time that. I think it evolved into that over time.
So how did you use your room? Like, what was the room sort of doing?
You know, I think the room, it was a bit difficult for this show because Joe and I just had a symbiosis, and we could literally sit there and be like, ooh, do this, and let's do that, and let's go do this, and we'll do that. And then, but the room, we use the room the way that everybody uses the room, which is that we all sit there and we break every episode. We break it every episode, every scene. So it's all about, you know, what's interesting, I think, is really for our room and all the people that were involved in it, it's bringing their voice to the table. And again, bringing this kind of let's push the bar, what's the crazy idea that makes total sense, but we never saw it coming. And I think that our room was really good at helping us shape the episodes that way.
You know, speaking of Anthony Hemingway, how did the decision come about to actually have him direct sort of 4 episodes and then he comes on as a producer? Like, what was that decision like?
It was a very easy decision. Anthony came in and he said, you know, we had met with a lot of directors who brought in like sepia tone lookbooks. And I was just like, oh my God, if I see one more sepia tone lookbook with 12 Years a Slave pictures in it. And he came in with the vibe. You know, he came in with the vibe we wanted, which we were like, we want bright colors, we want all this stuff, we want this to move, we want to feel like we're actually in it and not looking at a portrait on the wall. So it was simple, it's very simple.
Let's talk about character a little bit, because one of my favorite characters in the show is Miss Ernestine, who I absolutely love. I love her performance, but also I just love her character. And it's interesting because one of the things that sort of we've adopted this ideology that being a house slave was so much easier, right? You weren't in the field, you know, you're in the big house, things are easier. But you sort of debunked that stereotype with her character. And I'm curious to know, one, you already talked about the research, but when you're approaching a character like that, how do you sort of craft that narrative, you know?
How do I craft the narrative? I think you always have to find some of yourself in the character, and I always feel a bit of a house slave working in this industry, so I don't think it's too hard to make the leap.
What does that mean? Elaborate on that analogy.
That leap. I mean, I think that we know exactly what it means. It's like you make these products and you're in this industry and you're going, what am I making this product in service of? And I think that that's a lot of the stuff that we explored with Ernestine, was this idea that somebody's looking at you going, you have the upper hand here, you have a vaulted position. Is that truth or is that false? And just because someone's saying it, does that make it true? And then you've now bought into it. Does that make it true?
Everybody out there in the fields, they think they want to be in the big house. Closer you are to the white folks, the better, safer. What they don't know is that living in their world, it starts to change you. We start acting like them. 2 things we never thought we could. Early May, she picked cotton out in that field all day, every day, and I was jealous of her. Master owned her from sunup to sundown, but after that, she had her man and her baby. She could read. She could escape. We don't never get to let go.
That's, for me, was, you know, the thing, and it was very easy to explore with her and really take a time to think about it.
What character would you say was the most difficult one to figure out, if there was one?
Difficult to figure out? Noah. Okay. I'd say Noah, because I think that, you know, you have the hero being the hero, and then, you know, they have to drive the story and they have to be interesting still. And I think that's sometimes really hard to make the, you know, Jack in Lost character interesting. And so that I think was the hardest to figure out.
Another scene that I really, really loved in that show was the scene with Bokeem Woodbine where he writes the love letter to his wife and he hands the letter to her and she obviously loves it, but she destroys it.
Did you just?
I've been teaching myself to read. Writing is just drawing the sounds that the words make.
What'd it say?
Say how I feel about you. Say why I taught myself to do this. Say love.
It's amazing. I want to keep it forever.
as you're sort of writing that scene and even sort of on set watching actors perform that scene, sort of where does that come from in the sense of sort of writing that love letter and then having him give it to her?
Well, with Bokeem's character, we talked a lot about Frederick Douglass and teaching himself to read, and that idea just blows my mind personally, where I'm like, someone teaching themselves to read, knowing that this could get them killed. Like that, I'm just like, that simple thing every day I read, and I don't think twice about it. And here was a person who had to teach themselves to do that, and to teach themselves to do it knowing it could get them killed. It was the whole, you know, with Bokeem, the character and what we wanted to explore. And I think when you just take a moment to think about that, it just takes you in all these places. So I think it's that, where we're like, okay, well, your wife would love this. She would love this. But at the same time, she can't love that.
If you don't have it in you to take up arms against the injustice, then you gotta pray another prayer. And you gotta walk in it with conviction. He will provide, but you gotta do your part. You gotta find what it means for you to be a soldier. Beat back those that are trying to kill everything good and right in the world and call it making it great again. We can't afford to be just citizens in a time of war. That'll be surrender. That'll be giving up our future and our souls. Ain't nobody get to sit this one out, you hear me?
Joe and I like the idea of doing kind of an out-of-the-box episode. So in season 1, we did Cradle, which was from all the kids' perspective. And so we were like, what's going to be our out-of-the-box episode this season? Obviously, it seems like it should be with Harriet, because we also knew, as much as we would love the character of Harriet, she wasn't going to be prominent in every single episode. So we were like, what can we do that's going to platform her? And then we were doing research, and in the research, we found that at this time, in 1859, she was actually giving these speeches to like raise money for the cause. And to me, I went, what? I went, Harriet Tubman was giving speeches to raise money for the cause. That's crazy. That's crazy, because I was like, and now you're a person to me. Now you're a person who's fundraising.
We're here to hear Harriet speak, so let her speak.
It took me some time to line up my thoughts on the captain. Here was this white man standing before a room of black folks who had all been in bondage, telling us that he was ready to take up the cause of a race that was not his own. He ain't know the crippling grip of slavery. He ain't know the intractable will of the slaveholders. And everything I knew told me no white man would be willing to risk his own blood for black folks' freedom. But the captain would. And he already had.
Here's a perfect chance for us to tell her entire history, because much as I say the show isn't historical, I knew that this was going to be some people's first entry into Harriet Tubman. So I was like, how do I feel like I've said enough about her by the end of the season? And so then that's when I was watching actually a TED Talk with Maya Angelou, and I was like, oh my God. And like in that TED Talk, she went to all the places. It was like 12 minutes. It wasn't a TED Talk, it was just a speech, but it was like 12 minutes of her making you cry, making you laugh, singing. And I was just like, oh, if we could do this for an hour, we've won. And I think that no one believed we were going to do that. So when we said episode 6 is going to be all Harriet Tubman talking, and they were like, yeah. Like even Aisha Hines, who loved my life, she didn't believe it. She was like, sure, okay, great. Everybody thought we would put flashbacks in it. But again, it was like we were down to the wire, and either it was going to be a massive failure or it was going to be amazing. And for me, I'm like, if that's not the case, why are we doing it?
And it's interesting because the question then becomes, did you know? I mean, when you watched it, and you're there on set, did you just know it was going to be amazing, or were you still?
It was a religious experience on set. Everybody was keyed in, everybody from directors, production, like literally this episode came together in less than a week. And it was at the point where the entire crew was exhausted. Like we had done it. We were like, we all hate each other, we wanna go home. Then some magic happened with the script, we wrote it, and then everybody read it, and they were like, we're ready to do justice by this. And so when we were on set, and you know, everybody was there trying to be the team player for Aisha because she really had the lion's share of something to do. And because we did every act full take. And then she goes up there, she does the first take, and after the first one, we went, we're gonna be okay. This is gonna work. It's gonna be good. And then it was, and that's what it was. And it was just, it was amazing.
Where are you going?
Tell Noah to find me.
He took all of them.
It's okay. It's okay. You free. You gonna be free. You gonna be free.
We get through season 2, and there's that final moment where Noah basically looks at his son and he says, you know, you're never gonna be a slave, basically. And obviously we know that that means there's something else coming, and the show's canceled. How do you, one, take that news, and then also sort of how is it to leave something that you know still has so much life within it, you know?
I took it as it came because I really wasn't surprised. I mean, Sinclair Media had bought the network, they had canceled Outsiders. Like, it didn't surprise me. I wasn't like, oh my God, you canceled the show. I was surprised that no other network picked it up. I was very surprised by that. And then I went, why was I surprised by that? Misha, come on. You work in this business, you should know. And how do I take it? I take it as there's still more stories to tell in a variety of different ways. And, you know, I look at Underground and I go, it's insane that that is entirely everything I wanted it to be. And it's more insane considering the subject matter. So in that, I just go, okay, what do we got next? I long ago realized that I care very little about the stuff that sells. And I've luckily been able to carve out a space where that doesn't matter. And I don't know if that's actually lucky. I mean, I think you can carve out that space if you want to. I think that I have a particular thing that interests me, and it's again about figuring out where you can do that. And you can't do it anywhere. So you just have to do it somewhere, and then you have to say, I'm doing it this way. Sorry, we're not gonna do it the way you're doing it.
And it's interesting because do you think sort of not knowing the rules per se allows you to go in and just sort of do your thing? Because sometimes when you know the rules too much, you feel like you have to follow those rules. But if you know.
No, as long as you don't feel like you have to follow the rules.
Okay.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I do. I think you have to a bit, you know, my sister said it once. She was like, Hollywood is the wild, wild west. And I was like, it really is. Like, you can do, again, if people think they will make money off of, and here's, I guess, the freedom I have as a writer is that I'm the first creator on anything. Like, I don't have to wait for anybody to allow me to do my thing. Gotcha. And they can't do their thing until my thing is finished. So for me, I go, I don't understand how writers aren't making billions of dollars. Like, this thing is created from the thing that I'm creating. So what? I'm supposed to be like, oh no, whatever you want, sure. No, you know better than me what this should happen with this project. Nah, that seems crazy to me. And I don't like to live in crazy town.
Okay.
You've been watching A Conversation with Misha Green on OnStory. On Story is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's On Story project, including the On Story PBS series, now streaming online, the On Story radio program and podcast in collaboration with Public Radio International, and the On Story book series available on Amazon. To find out more about On Story and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.